Hello, I'm Bob Melnick, aka the Pierogi King. My daughter Karen Rhodes is in charge of this production. Our goal is to promote do-it-yourself pierogies, making pierogies the king's way. First, a little background. One of my grandkids, I'm not sure which one, it's either Chelsea or Nathan or Stacy or maybe Matt. Anyway, one of them a few years back documented the following. It goes something like this. This recipe for pierogies is Bob Melnick's final, as he says, version of this family's favorite. His mother, my great-grandmother, Anne Volotka Melnick, made these for him during his childhood. Grandpa loved them so much as an adult he learned to make them himself. But he used modern tools to make them. He became the Pierogi King, his own nickname for himself. A local grocery chain caught wind of this master of pierogies and asked if he would input his vast knowledge to a group of interested home chefs. Grandpa delights in talking about pierogies with anyone who will listen, or even those who won't. So, he agreed and taught 12 or 13 classes at several Bueller's supermarkets. What follows is a recipe of our family favorite. And the grandchild went on to list the pierogi recipe, and I'm not going to go through that in detail now. You'll see more of that later on. Okay, with a little background out of the way, let's start. First, what equipment do we need to make pierogies? Let me go over that. First of all, we need a pasta machine. You see that here, and many of you have seen pasta machines before, but probably not many have seen them with a motor on. Some years ago, my daughter Judy got this motor for me, and it's been really very handy. What it does for you is allows you to have both hands free. Without the motor, you have a crank here that cranks the dough out, but you only have one hand to handle the dough. This is much, much better. That's an important tool for modern pierogi making. Of course, then there's the old-fashioned rolling pin. Now, my mother used the rolling pin to roll out the dough. She didn't have access to a machine back in those days, so this is much more labor intensive, but it gets the job done. And I still use it to a limited degree in making my pierogies. Okay, another very important tool is this mold. Some people advertise this as a dumpling mold, some as a pierogi mold, whatever, but this is very handy, and we'll show you more about that later on. And this gadget here, I call it a scraper. It comes in very handy for moving the dough around and so on. So we'll see more of that. And of course, we have the old household spoons, measuring spoons, and of course the measuring cups. Most every kitchen has these, and most have a flour sifter. This comes in very handy. You'll see how we use that later on. And we have our measuring bowls, and we have a knife, and so on. So that kind of covers what you need. The only other thing I might mention is we have here a very good surface for rolling the dough, and that's important that you have a decent surface. So you'll see how that works in a little bit. Okay, now that we've given you a little bit of history of what pierogies are all about, and we've shown you a little bit about the equipment that we use, we're going to start out by preparing the dough. And the first thing that I do is to mix the, I'll call them the wet ingredients, mostly wet, in a little bowl. Get down here like this and show you. Whisk it up a little bit, and that's going to go over the top of the flour. And here's the I'm going to prepare the flour. It's this particular recipe calls for 4.5 cups of, it's an all-purpose flour. So I'll just measure four cups. And I could have done this ahead of time, but I didn't. 1. Sound effects there. 2. And that's 3. And this is 4. And we'll throw in 1/2 cup. Okay. So we'll make a little bowl out of this thing and just start mixing. Here's our mixture. We're going to put that in the center here. Some people drizzle it in a little at a time. I just throw it all in at one time. Start mixing. Start out with a spoon. Mix it up good. And sometimes we'll find, depending on the humidity and how large the eggs are and so on and so forth, we might need to add a little water. If the dough is too doughy, we need to get it in a workable condition, so we'll add a little water if necessary. Okay, it's about the consistency when I need to start kneading it by hand now. Do that. Of course, I washed my hands thoroughly beforehand, I want you to know. Okay, so just start kneading it. This makes a real mess with the fingers. Karen, you can shut that off at any time, can't you?
Yeah.
Well, not just yet, not just yet.
I just did this one.
Okay, as I said, it makes a real mess. So we get most of it mixed this way, and then I'll dump it out on the counter and finish the process. My young kids and grandkids, when they saw me making this at this stage, they'd say, "Ugh." Okay, we'll dump the rest of that in. And that's about that. Now, I have a little bit of moisture left in this thing. I'm just going to pour that in here. And we'll incorporate this all together as best we can. Now you'll notice that this is all strictly, the coloring is for the flour and the mixture, the eggs and so on, and I've added no food coloring. Now this particular recipe is going to be with potato pierogies, and I use the natural color of the dough for the potatoes. But if I were filling these with, say, meat, I'd choose a red food coloring, and I'd add it into that liquid mixture, and then I have a differentiation between, of course, the sort of pale yellow ones, which are strictly identified for the potato pierogies, and we have the red for the meat. And if I were making, like, for instance, a spinach or spinach and cheese or something like that, I would choose a green food coloring, a few drops in there. And the reason for that is, you know, you cook these and put them on a platter for the folks to eat, and you know, geez, this person wants meat and this person wants potatoes. So if they're all the same color, it makes it a little difficult. So I found that by using a little bit of food coloring, that kind of enhances the process. by the way, I think that's my own invention, because of all the cookbooks I've ever seen, they've never mentioned that, so I'll take credit for it anyway. Now this dough feels pretty good to me. You know, after you've experienced doing this for a time, you get the feel for when the dough is just right. If it's too sticky, maybe you sprinkle a little bit of flour on this thing while you're kneading it. Or if it's too stiff, you might use a little bit of water, a little bit of moisture. So I knead it somewhere around 5 minutes. You want to get it mixed in good, all the ingredients. And one other thing too is if you were if you didn't have a pasta machine, a rolling machine, you'd have to knead it a little longer. But the process of rolling it through that machine actually needs it too. So I won't have to do it quite as long, since I'm going to use the machine. So I just kind of consolidate it well and put it off to the side to rest for maybe a half hour. And I'm going to cover it with a damp cloth so that it obviously doesn't dry out. Alright, now we're going to start assembling a batch of pierogies. And to start with, I made ahead of time the potato onion filling. We'll supply the recipe at some point in time for that particular filling. But anyway, we're going to start with that. So I'll show you how the process goes, and we'll go from there. The first thing I do is with the dough, I'll uncover it, of course, and this particular batch I'll cut it into about 3 segments. Let me show you here better. I'll cut it into about 3 equal segments, and I'll use about 1/3 of this at a time. Put the dough back over and cover it up. Okay, and I'm going to start out with this batch of dough. Now what I have to do is get it in shape so I can get it into the rollers here. So obviously that big glob of dough won't go in there, so I have to thin it out. What I usually generally do is roll it out like so, and then, so this is modern pierogi making, modern equipment. I still have to rely on the old-fashioned rolling pin, and I should have powdered the counter a little bit here with a little bit of flour. I'm going to use that to flour my rolling pin. Then I'm going to roll it out. So that I get it thin enough to fit into the rollers here on the machine. And that's going to do most of the work for us. And that's about all it takes. It doesn't take a whole lot to get it ready. And I set this on the widest setting on the machine, and that happens to be number 1. Turn the machine on and we'll get started. Flip the setting over to, I usually, you can go to number 2, number 3, number 4, but I usually skip a setting. Depend on the consistency of the dough, but I think this will work. I'm going to skip a section, and and if the dough's not wide enough the first time, see I double it over and get another pass at it, So it takes a little bit of fooling around to get the right size. Here we go again. Okay, we're getting there. Now, the dough is still a little bit too thick. So I'm going to just move it up to number 4 and see how that comes out. Now, you probably can appreciate the fact that I have this motor on here now, can't you? Now, if I didn't have the motor and I had just a machine, I'd have a crank on it. And I'd be having to crank this thing. And that allows me with only one hand to handle a dough. And you can see how handy it is to have both hands available. Okay, now we've got a nice big long piece of dough here. I hope I have enough counter space to put this on. And I do. You know, and one thing too, in sizing the dough, if you find that it's awkward to have a big long piece like this, you might cut that dough instead of 3 pieces, 4 pieces. And you'll end up with a shorter length of dough here, and it might be easier to work with. Okay, and one of the things I noticed on this is that I got some narrow places here. This is fine here. So I'll use this rolling pin just to kind of give it a final roll to size this dough properly. The other thing this rolling pin does for us, it really puts the dough down on the counter well, and it as I'll show you later, it makes it much better to adhere in the mold. Okay, now the next thing I do is I size this for the dough is going to go on the mold here, and so I need to size and cut this accordingly. So this is the way I do it. I just mark it here like so. Okay, like so. Okay, and I'm ready to cut the dough. And I use my handy dandy scraper, and I just cut it between those circles that you probably can't see on the camera. But anyway, I cut it like so. Cut it. Okay. Now, the next step. Oh, first of all, let me add one thing. This sifter, you're probably wondering what I use that for. The sifter is a handy gadget. I put a little flour in it, keep it handy here. And before I put the dough onto the mold, I dust the mold with just a little bit of flour, like so. And that keeps the flour from sticking to the mold. We don't want that. Okay, so the next step is I have to drag one of these things off the counter, and I scrape it off, and I put the downside up. Real important, because the downside has no flour on it. It's sticky as opposed to the top side, so it's ready to accept the whatever filling you're going to use. In this case, we're using potato. Okay, so here's how I generally prepare the potato. I have about a tablespoon size spoon. That's easy for me to say, huh, Karen? Anyway, I get that in there, and I make a generous. It's a little bit over a tablespoon, but anyway, what I want to do, my goal is to get as much filling in as I can. And see, I just drop it in there, and then I kind of squeeze it a little bit, make sure that when I fold this mold up, I don't want to contaminate the edges here, because then I'll lose the seal. And then when I put it in the water, boil it and prepare it, then I have what I call a blowout. We don't want to have those. So anyway, now you have this hinged mold, and you simply fold it over and then squeeze it. See, I squeezed these edges here together, and of course the thing captures the filling that we use. So squeeze it good. Then I take a knife and I trim the edge right here. Okay, now I have this trim, and I'm going to put it over here aside. I'm going to use this later. Again, I'm not going to throw it away. It's good stuff. I give it one final squeeze, and then I'm going to set here. I forgot one thing important. I have a pan here that I'm going to use. By the way, all these are going to go into the freezer. Now I could put these aside and put them in the pot and boil them for supper if I wanted to, or put them in the refrigerator and have them later in the evening. But what I'm going to do is put these in the freezer. So I'm going to dust this pan just lightly. Okay, this is where how I'm going to store these. Okay, I got it all prepared. Now I'm ready to open the mold. Okay, I open the mold. You see it's dusted with a little flour. Here, pull it out, and see you have really a nice shaped pierogi. Now, when my mom made them, and when I first started making them, they weren't uniform, of course. I didn't have a mold, and maybe later I'll show you just what they look like when I made them before I mechanized this process. So anyway, I just drop it in the pan here, and we go on to the next one. And there you have it. That's the process of assembling pierogies. So I know every one of you watching this thing can do this. Now, don't get discouraged. It takes a little while, particularly the consistency of the dough. You'll know after a while what's good. Sometimes you have to, like I said before, I have to add a little flour. Sometimes you have to add a little bit of moisture, a little bit of water. Depends on the humidity, depends on the size of the egg, and so on. So, hey, go to it and have fun. Yep, that's boiling. I'm trying not to burn myself while I load the boiling pot. You see it's starting to lose the boil, putting these cold pierogies in here, but it'll soon come back to a boil, and we'll start timing it. And occasionally we'll give this a little mix so that they don't stick to the bottom. Like so. Put the lid on until kind of watch it. We don't want it to boil over, kind of watch it. And while that's going on, it's a good time to melt the butter in this frying pan, and we'll add the onions that I've already sauteed. They're here. We'll add that. I'm going to add about maybe half a stick of butter here. Now the secret to these pierogies are right here. Butter and onions. Onions and butter. In fact, I tell people if they like pierogies, slathered with butter and onions, that if they saute cardboard with butter and onions, it tastes just as good.
This is all very fresh, but when you have a little distance, that's what we get exposure. Might help get rid of some of that anger. What anger? But it's your
timer for about 7 minutes. Seven or 8 minutes. And we'll boil those top on. We'll turn down the fire a little bit so we get just a kind of a rolling boil. You might notice I have a towel here and a towel here, and when these pierogies are finished after about 7 minutes, we'll dip them out of there and put them on the towel and then kind of wipe the excess moisture off before we put them into the frying pan. Okay, our 7 to 8 minutes are up. One last stir. Turn off the fire and we'll start dipping these out. Now you notice we have a somewhat of a colorful display here. The tan ones here, the purple tan, are the mushroom cheese pierogies. The red ones have a beef and sausage filling, and the pale ones, the white ones, dough-colored ones, are potato, and we have a few potato and cheese in there as well. So we scoop that out there, and then all I do is just lightly pat these dry a little bit. Like so. And then the next step is to, you should get a fork for that. The next step is to put these in the frying pan with the onions and the butter. They won't all fit in there at the same time, but that's okay. And this, we didn't talk about. This is our excess dough. We don't waste anything. That's good to eat too, that dough. Obviously. So I think I'll get about half of these in here. And then we're just gonna turn up the heat just a bit. And I'm not gonna leave these in very long, just mainly to get the onion and butter covering the pierogies. Some people like to leave them in a little longer than others. You can actually make the dough a little bit crispy if you wanted to. I prefer just to kind of move them around a little bit and that's because I'm anxious to start eating them. Okay. Alright, these are on fire long enough, I believe. We're going to put these in our casserole or bowl here. throw a few onions over that. Now we're going to be eating these right away, and so we'll serve a couple up on the plates here, and give everybody a colorful variety. Once again, this is meat. These are the mushroom cheese, and this is the potato. And this is just the plain dough right here. Okay. Whoops. Okay. Now, one of the things you can do too with these pierogies, you have more than what you're going to eat or you're going to serve, refrigerate them, and then I just reheat them in the microwave. And if you're going to have more folks here with a lot more pierogies, and you see we're working in batches here, back and forth to the frying pan and so on. So to keep them warm, I turn the oven on at a very low temperature, and they stay nice and warm in the casserole dish here. So that's about it. We're ready to eat. Okay, we're pretty much winding down on this pierogi making, but I want to close with a few things I need to emphasize, maybe a couple things I've forgotten, and maybe it'll help with the whole process. I want to talk about the Bueller's experience. I think it was at the beginning of the program we introduced where one of my grandkids talked about Grandpa and his recipe and how he started, and he had some shows at the Bueller supermarkets. Well, one of the things I want to talk about there is that, well, a couple things. One is my wife attended the first 2 or 3, and she critiqued me. And when she came out to tell me how it was going, she emphasized 2 things. One, she says, make sure before you start handling the dough and the stuff in front of all these ladies, that you wash your hands. And I said, oh, okay, I did. And then she says, and by the way, the other thing is, you really shouldn't be scratching your butt. So anyway.
Cut!
Anyway, she was, and it was good advice. But anyway, at those particular presentations, I'd start out by going around the room, and there are usually 10 or 12 ladies there, and I'd ask them individually, well, why are you here? And they tell me, I make pierogies, I want to see how somebody else does it, or I'm new at this, I want to learn to make them, I've never made them before, and so on and so forth. And this one lady, when I asked her why she was here, she said, well, my sisters and I, we make it at the holiday time, and there's 5 of us, and we gather around the counter, and the first thing we do is we pull out the most important thing too, the bottle of wine and the glasses, and they start out by toasting each other and toasting pierogies. And so it sounds like they had a great time, and they end up making dozens and dozens of pierogies at these sessions. Another incident I think worth mentioning at one of these sessions, I got to this lady that was sitting way up in the back, and I asked her why she was here. She says, well, I'm the production manager of Parma Pierogies. I said, you're what? Yes, she says, we have a couple stores up in Parma and up near Cleveland. And I accused her of being an industrial spy. But anyway, we had a real good time there. One of the things that I talked about earlier, and you saw in the demonstration of making the dough and rolling it out and so on, and then putting it onto the mold, I talked about making sure that the bottom side, in other words, the side of the dough that's touching the counter, you turn that over so that when you fold the pierogi mold over the dough on itself, you actually have a sticky side against a sticky side. And you squeeze it, and that really gives you a good seal around the edges here. And it avoids blowouts. We don't want blowouts. One of the things I should have mentioned, well, how long does this all take? And actually, I've gotten quicker over the years, as you can imagine, but between the assembly of the dough with the filling and making the filling itself, I've included that in, I can do 3 dozen in 2 hours. So that gives you some idea of how long. I don't expect you to be able to do that initially, but you know, with time, experience, you're going to get much faster. One of the other things that I don't know if I emphasize it enough, but sometimes the dough you'll find, even though you precisely measure everything and mix it up well, that sometimes it's too sticky. And there are reasons for that. One of the reasons is, one of the factors is how large are the eggs that you're putting in. Another factor is what's the humidity today out there. So it varies. And when that happens, you have to adjust. And so it means that you'll have to add a little bit more flour if it's too sticky. You just sprinkle a little more. And this is where this sifter comes in handy. I just put a little flour in there. I dust the dough out and run it through the machine, and it all works out. But like I say, it's a certain amount of feel, and you won't get it overnight. It's going to take a while, but I think it'll all work out for you. I usually make these, like I said before, this particular recipe that you'll see is for about 3 dozen. It makes 3 dozen. And what I do, generally speaking, is I make different kinds. I'll make one of my favorites is ground beef and sausage filling. Another is mushroom and cheese filling, and I'll make those, and I usually freeze them. I'll put them on a platter and dust it a little bit and put them in the freezer, and then I'll put them in plastic baggies, and they really do well. And then, as you saw in the one segment where we cook them, you know, they're frozen solid. You put them in the boiling water and then cook them that way, time them out and so on. I'm trying to think, is there, the one thing, I said it before, and I said at the beginning of this thing, it's important to have the sticky side down and up when you put it on the mold. That's real important. So that's about it. I hope you folks all benefit from the little presentation. I had fun doing it with my director, photographer, producer, Karen Melling, my daughter. Thank you so much.